Hello, I am Griffin Maltby, and today I will be presenting on climate change and its shifting of fire regimes and the effects that has on our forest. So first, climate is causing hotter and drier temperatures throughout many of our forests, resulting in more intense fires, which alters fire regimes and has detrimental effects on forests. And before we get further into the presentation, I would just like to define fire regime. A fire regime is a typical characteristics of the fire that a specific species or forest type is adapted to, being the frequency of fire, the severity and intensity, and seasonality of the fire. There are two main perspectives that come to light when discussing climate change and its effect on shifting fire regimes. The first perspective is tree species have adapted to changing climates and fire regimes for millions of years and will continue to do so. Tree species have a long history of dealing with fires. Fires have been documented to manage and affect forests for hundreds of millions of years and will continue to do so for hundreds of millions of years. Tree species have adapted traits to deal with their specific fire regime and to survive and combat those. One example of those is the ponderosa pine, native to Colorado. It has thick bark, which allows it to survive and remain unchanged during its frequent low severity surface fires that it's accustomed to. The climate has shifted throughout history, changing fire regimes, and forests will continue to adapt and survive. As seen on the figure on the left, there is changes and fluctuations of area burned, and that is typically due to climate and the conditions that that fire area is in. But it has changed throughout history, and tree species have been able to adapt and will continue to do so. The second perspective of this issue is forests will be able to adapt due to rate of forests will be unable to adapt due to the rate that climate change is shifting fire regimes. Forest and tree species have already been observed moving up in elevation to combat the changing climate, but with this movement in migration, tree species are bringing their fire regime with them. And fire regimes in higher elevations typically have a more detrimental effect just due to the lack of resources and the ability for trees to reestablish in high elevations following disturbances. Tree species are adapted to their historic fire regime, not necessarily those ones influenced heavily by climate. We can see that in the bottom figure on the right, there has been a pretty drastic increase of the severity of area burned and the destruction these fires have had. This has resulted in more intense fires and the loss of many different tree species and forest types due to high rates of mortality due to the damaging effects of the fire. In this perspective, the climate is changing too rapidly for species to keep up, and we will see ultimately a decrease in forest cover. So concluding throughout this research, tree species have the ability to adapt to fires and have demonstrated that throughout history. But many researchers are asking that if this rate of change of climate shifting fire regimes is too rapid for species to keep up, the rate that climate is shifting fire regimes is far too rapid for evolutionary effects to take place, which typically take generations to develop new traits and new ways to deal with fire. So, upon concluding, I believe that management actions need to be done in assisting tree species to adapt and survive these new fire regimes that have been drastically altered due to climate shifting. Thank you.